Charleston smelled of salt and jasmine in the spring. The breeze from the Ashley River carried with it stories as old as the cobblestones beneath Charlotte Evans' feet, tales of power, prestige, and perfectly manicured lives. She had grown up hearing those stories told in velvet-draped dining rooms under the flicker of chandeliers, where every word was measured and every smile came with a price tag. But now, at 28, Charlotte lived 2 miles from the estates of her childhood, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a bookstore on Queen Street. Her windows rattled when the church bells rang, and her kitchen faucet still dripped despite 3 calls to the landlord. She loved it. By day, Charlotte taught art at Eastview High, a public school struggling to keep its arts program alive. Her classrooms smelled of acrylic paint and old textbooks, filled with loud laughter, quiet sketchers, and a rotating chaos of color. It was, in every way, the opposite of where she came from. The Evans Winters dynasty wasn't known for its tolerance of dreamers. Her grandfather, Theodore Teddy Winters, had built a real estate empire across the Carolinas: hotels, luxury apartments, historical renovations. Every member of the family was expected to contribute to the legacy: law, finance, architecture, investments. Everyone except Charlotte. She was the first child of Caroline Winters and Robert Evans, a couple often photographed in Charleston's society pages for their philanthropic galas and real estate conquests. Caroline, always in pearls. Robert, always in power. Her younger siblings, Blake and Meredith, had slid seamlessly into the mold. Blake now an associate partner at a hedge fund, Meredith halfway through law school at Yale. And then there was Charlotte, the art teacher who still brought handmade gifts to Christmas, whose fingernails were stained with paint, who once dared to speak passionately about color theory at a black-tie dinner. To her family, Charlotte was the wandering soul who never learned to calculate ROI or spell the word merger without gagging. She has potential, her mother often sighed, the way one might say about a leaky faucet, annoying but fixable. She's just different. But not to Grandpa Teddy. Her grandfather saw in Charlotte what no one else dared to: value without condition. From the time she was a child, he would sneak away from boardroom calls to join her in the garden with her sketchpad. "What are we drawing today, my little renegade?" he'd ask with a chuckle, pulling out a stubby pencil from his coat pocket. When the rest of the family toasted acquisition milestones with Cristal, he celebrated Charlotte's first art show in a gallery no bigger than a pantry, bringing her a wrapped set of professional-grade brushes and the proudest smile she'd ever seen. One memory lived with her more vividly than all the others. It was the spring of her 17th year. Her high school had hosted an exhibition for the art students, and Charlotte had worked for weeks on a piece that would provoke. It was a mixed-media installation, a twisting structure of wire and fabric that depicted the widening gap between wealth and humanity. She knew, even then, it was dangerous to hold a mirror that ugly to the world she came from. But she couldn't help herself. She believed in it. She needed it to mean something. The night of the show, her parents were absent, as usual, attending a business dinner in Savannah. Her siblings, when invited, had offered vague excuses. She stood beside her sculpture, hands clammy, heart in her throat, as people murmured and passed. Some nodded. Some frowned. Others didn't know what to make of it at all. And then he arrived. "Provocative," came the voice from behind, low and amused. "I like it. Makes people uncomfortable in all the right ways." She turned, and there he was, Grandpa Teddy in his gray wool coat, a scotch-colored scarf around his neck, smiling like he'd just discovered treasure. She didn't say anything at first. She was too stunned. But the tears had formed before she could stop them. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did. What kind of art collector would I be if I missed the debut of Charleston's most dangerous artist?" She laughed through the tears. "They'll never understand it." "They're not meant to," he said, touching her shoulder gently. "But the right people will. And that's enough." That night, they walked together along the Battery, the street lamps throwing golden halos over the dark water. She told him about her dreams, of owning a studio, of helping kids who never got to pick up a brush. He listened. Really listened. No correction. No redirection. "You know," he said after a while, "when I was your age, I wanted to be a sculptor." She looked at him, startled. But you? I built buildings because I was good at it. But what I loved was shaping something from nothing, turning chaos into form. It's not so different, you know. Art and business. Then why didn't you do it? He smiled, but there was sadness in it. Because no one believed I could. And eventually neither did I. She never forgot that. Not his words. Not his face. Not the pause between truth and surrender. Over the years, their moments grew more infrequent, but never less meaningful. They met in art museums when he was supposed to be at meetings. He'd call her on Sunday mornings to ask what color she'd been thinking in lately. He gave her books on philosophy and color theory and wrote her long, typed letters about legacy, not the kind that sat in vaults, but the kind that lived in the choices people made when no one was watching. Then came the call. A Tuesday. Rain tapping against the studio windows like knuckles on glass. Charlotte had just finished grading a pile of student sketches. Her phone lit up with her mother's name. Charlotte, her mother said, voice sharp and clipped. Your grandfather passed away this morning. The service will be Friday. Wear something appropriate. That was it. No pause. No softness. The world felt quieter after that, as if someone had turned down the volume on everything. She sat in her studio, staring at a half-finished painting, an abstract swirl of blues and golds, and didn't lift a brush for hours. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just sat there, surrounded by color, and felt the absence of the only person who'd ever truly seen her. What she didn't know then was that Grandpa Teddy had already set a final masterpiece in motion, one that would fracture her family and place her at the center of a legacy she never asked for. But that part of the story hadn't begun yet. For now, there was only quiet, the smell of turpentine, and the sound of rain against the glass. The last time Charlotte Evans stepped through the gates of the Winters estate, the air had smelled like cinnamon and pine. It had been Christmas, and her handmade candle gifts, carefully wrapped in recycled craft paper, had earned a polite nod from her mother and a whispered joke from her brother, Blake, about bohemian poverty chic. That was 6 months ago. Now, the air was heavy with humidity and magnolia blossoms, but something else lingered beneath it. Tension. Legacy. Ghosts. The estate itself loomed over the manicured lawns like a relic from another time, Greek columns, wrought iron balconies, and stained glass windows so pristine they could have been preserved in amber. She parked her Honda Civic at the edge of the circular drive, its matte paint and modest silhouette stark against the sea of black Bentleys, Audis, and imported Range Rovers. Still driving that thing? Her cousin Graham muttered as he passed, not breaking stride. Brave. Charlotte said nothing. She adjusted the hem of her navy dress, ironed twice, still wrinkled, and clutched her handbag like armor. She walked inside. The foyer hadn't changed. Mahogany staircase, chandeliers, oil portraits of ancestors who'd made their fortunes in shipping and cotton and later, modern real estate. She had never felt more out of place. The family had already gathered in the library, where dark oak panels lined the walls and books stood untouched like museum props. Charlotte paused at the threshold, steadying her breath. Her mother, Caroline, perched on a leather armchair, her posture knife-straight, her eyes already assessing. Her father, Robert, flanked by Blake and Meredith, barely looked up. She took the seat assigned to her, a subtle insult, placed just outside the main cluster, as if she were a visiting guest rather than blood. At precisely 2 p.m., Philip Rothwell, the family's longtime attorney, entered the room. He was an old man with thick glasses and a quiet voice that held the authority of decades of non-disclosure agreements and estate documents. He carried a leather folder and a flash drive. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today we're gathered to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Theodore Winters." There was a respectful silence, momentary, obligatory. Philip began with formalities. Small inheritances were announced with professional precision. To Caroline, family heirlooms, some dating back to 1856. To Robert, 3 vintage cars and a personal investment account. To Blake and Meredith, property shares in vacation homes across Aspen and Nantucket. Cousins and extended relatives received trust fund top-offs and token gifts. Charlotte sat still. Her name hadn't been called. She could feel her mother's satisfied glance, as if the omission were proof that the old man hadn't been as sentimental as Charlotte imagined. Then Philip cleared his throat. We now come to the final section of Mr. Winter's will regarding the primary residence, business assets, and consolidated investment holdings. The room straightened. These include the Winters estate, controlling interest in Winters Holdings LLC, commercial properties under Tri-South Developments, and the Theodore Winters investment portfolio, totaling $187 million at the time of documentation. A pin could have dropped. Philip looked directly at Charlotte. These assets, he said slowly, are hereby transferred in full and without contest to Ms. Charlotte Elaine Evans. The silence was so complete, it roared. Charlotte blinked. She thought she'd misheard. Surely, it was a mistake. Surely, he meant a portion. A fraction. A footnote. But the expression on Philip's face was solemn. Final. What? Her mother whispered, a breathless edge of panic in her voice. Charlotte's father stood so suddenly his chair scraped against the polished floor. That's not possible. There's a clerical error. There must be. He wouldn't. It's absurd. Meredith snapped, her manicured hands trembling. Charlotte doesn't even know what a dividend is. Blake was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Lewis. This is going to be overturned. No way in hell this stands. Her mother sat frozen, mouth slightly open, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. Philip waited. He had done this before. There is no mistake, he said calmly. Mr. Winters had this document notarized and filed under legal supervision after several cognitive evaluations confirming full mental clarity. He reached into the folder and pulled out a flash drive. And, as per his final instruction, I am to play a recorded message now. The large television in the room lit up. And then there he was. Grandpa Teddy. He looked thinner than she remembered, face a little sunken, eyes more tired, but his voice was as steady as ever. If you're watching this, he began, then I've passed on, and Philip's just informed you of my decisions. I can only imagine the mood in the room. His smile was brief, sardonic. I want to begin by saying, I love you all. But love does not mean approval. And it certainly doesn't mean enabling. A ripple went through the room. For the past 15 years, I've observed, recorded, and tested every single one of you, not for your market savvy or public poise, but for something deeper: integrity, compassion, character. He leaned forward in the video, eyes sharp now. I've seen a lot of impressive resumes in this family, but very little soul. Her father scoffed audibly. I watched Caroline deny help to my assistant of 30 years when her husband fell ill. I watched Robert divert company funds to cover his gambling debts and then lie about it on a quarterly call. Meredith, I saw what you did to sabotage your colleague's promotion. Blake, the under-the-table deals, the fake shell companies, the tax evasions. Don't bother denying it. It's all documented. And it will remain sealed, so long as no one contests this will. The room had gone pale. Charlotte could feel the air thickening like a rising tide. And then there's Charlotte, he said, voice softening. The image of her grandfather grew closer, more intimate. Charlotte, my wild-hearted granddaughter, the only one who never asked me for money, never expected a thing. The one who brought beauty into the world without needing an audience. I've watched you live with integrity while the rest of us chased image. Charlotte felt tears brimming. You passed every test, even when you didn't know you were being tested. You saw people, not positions. You created, not for profit, but for meaning. You taught children how to see. He leaned back in the chair. I leave everything to you, not because you're the most strategic, but because you're the most human. The screen went black. No one moved. It was her cousin Graham who broke the silence. She must have manipulated him, he muttered, pointing at her. She played the long game. Charlotte rose to her feet slowly. Her knees felt shaky, her stomach a swirl of disbelief and adrenaline. I didn't know, she said quietly, voice hoarse. I swear I didn't know. Her mother stood too. This isn't over, she snapped, suddenly sharp again. This will be challenged in court. You'll lose everything. Philip raised a hand. If I may, Mr. Winters anticipated legal resistance. Any attempt to contest the will results in full forfeiture of the challenger's inheritance. That clause is binding. That silenced the room again. Robert Evans' jaw clenched so hard his temples twitched. Blake lowered his phone. Meredith looked like she'd been slapped. Charlotte felt lightheaded. Not with power, but with the enormity of it. The walls of the library, once lined with judgment and history, now felt oddly weightless. As if the air had shifted in her favor for the first time in her life. Her grandfather had rewritten the rules. Not in a courtroom, but in a single act of belief. And now, the burden of that belief rested squarely on her shoulders. The room still hadn't recovered from the will reading. Charlotte could feel every pair of eyes drilling into her skin, all trying to reconcile the quiet, paint-splattered art teacher with the new matriarch of a $187 million empire. She stood rooted near the edge of the room, her breath uneven, her palms cold. Her mother was frozen in a state of elegant disbelief, and her father had retreated into a corner, jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. Blake, red-faced and pacing, muttered about legal action. Meredith was texting furiously, presumably her lawyer. Charlotte wanted to leave. Drive her Honda into the sunset and disappear into the blue haze of the Carolina coast. But then Philip Rothwell, the family's attorney, cleared his throat. There is one more matter, he said, producing a small remote and a silver flash drive. Per Mr. Winters' final instructions, I've been asked to play this. He turned toward the mounted television above the fireplace. A subtle click, and the screen flickered to life. The silence in the room was immediate and total. There he was, Grandpa Teddy, on screen, seated in the familiar leather armchair of the estate library, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows behind him. He looked older than Charlotte remembered, more fragile, but there was still that familiar spark in his eyes, the quiet fire of a man who had built empires with both grit and grace. If you're watching this, he began, then I've passed, and my attorney Philip has informed you of my wishes. I imagine the atmosphere in the room is tense. There was a slight smirk at the corner of his mouth. A moment of mischievous self-awareness. I want to make something very clear. The decisions I've made were not spontaneous. They were the result of 15 years of careful observation, deliberate evaluation, and, truthfully, a heavy heart. The smirk faded. I love this family. But love isn't blind. And love doesn't mean I will reward behavior that undermines the very principles I tried to live by. The camera zoomed slightly closer. His voice dropped, gentler, more personal. Over the last decade and a half, I have quietly evaluated each of you, not as heirs, but as human beings. Not for your accolades or earnings, but for your choices when no one was watching. A sharp inhale echoed in the room. Caroline, my daughter, you broke my heart more times than you know. When my assistant, Dorothy, who served our family loyally for over 30 years, came to you during her husband's illness, you said, and I quote, "We can't set a precedent by helping staff." I watched Dorothy take out a second mortgage while you hosted a benefit gala for children in Monaco. Charlotte turned slowly to her mother, who was staring at the screen with a face so pale it looked carved from ivory. Robert, my son-in-law, I discovered the embezzlement through an internal audit 2 years after it happened. You funneled nearly $500,000 from our Westbrook subsidiary to cover your gambling debts, then manipulated the books to hide it. I didn't confront you because I wanted to see if you'd admit it. You never did. Robert dropped his eyes, his grip tightening on the chair's arm. Meredith, bright, ambitious, talented, you sabotaged Emily Porter, a woman who trusted you as a friend, so you could secure the promotion she was promised. I have the emails. I have the recordings. You didn't just climb the ladder, you kicked people off it. Meredith dropped her phone into her lap. Blake, you think I didn't know about the shell companies? About the side deals you arranged with zoning boards and developers for personal gain? Your entire pitch for Midtown Plaza was plagiarized from a junior analyst who you never credited or paid. Charlotte couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink with every word. The very air had become heavy, thick with history and accusation. No one dared speak. "Now," Grandpa Teddy said, his voice steady but softer, "you might ask why I'm airing all this now. The answer is simple. Because I am done pretending that wealth equals worth." He paused, his eyes glistening now with emotion. "And then, there's Charlotte." Charlotte's knees nearly gave way. The camera lingered on his face, now transformed by warmth and something close to awe. "My Charlotte. My rebel spirit. You never played the game. You never asked for favors or sought advantage. You lived quietly. Honestly. You gave what you had even when it was little. I saw you pay for a student's art supplies out of your own pocket. I saw you help your elderly neighbor get to her appointments. I saw you stay behind after your shift at the gallery to clean up, never mentioning it to anyone. I saw you give up weekends to paint murals in shelters, and still, you never once asked me for anything." Tears burned at the corners of Charlotte's eyes. Her throat ached. "You passed every test without knowing you were being tested. Because kindness wasn't a strategy for you. It was your nature." His eyes seemed to look directly at her. "That's why you, and only you, were chosen to inherit this family's legacy. Not just the money. The meaning." He leaned back. "I hope you forgive me for the burden. But I trust you'll carry it better than I ever did." The screen faded to black. No music. No dramatic ending. Just silence. A silence filled with things unspoken for years. Jealousy, resentment, missed chances, and the revelation that the person they all dismissed had quietly earned everything they believed was their right. Charlotte stood still, her arms folded across her chest, holding herself together. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice thin and trembling. "He manipulated you. He must have been sick." Charlotte turned. "He was never sharper. You heard the evaluations, the lawyers." Robert stepped forward. "You're not equipped for this. You're a schoolteacher, Charlotte. You don't know the first thing about running a real business." "I know how to be decent," she said quietly. "Apparently, that's more than most of you." "Give us a seat at the table," Blake snapped. "Let's work together. At least let us manage the assets. You can paint and make your murals." Charlotte shook her head. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about responsibility." And for the first time, someone in this family chose to take that seriously. There was nothing else to say. She walked out of the library, her legs moving on autopilot, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the voices behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the garden where she used to sit with Grandpa Teddy in the summers, barefoot in the grass, sketching butterflies and magnolia trees. She sank onto the wrought iron bench and finally let herself cry. But it wasn't grief that spilled down her cheeks. It was release. It was the feeling of being seen, of being chosen, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Somewhere inside, she heard his voice again. "You're not just the future, Charlotte. You're the course correction this family never saw coming." The letter sat on her kitchen table for 6 days. Its envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and bore her name in the elegant handwriting she had known since childhood, Charlotte Elaine Evans, inked in black fountain pen with a slight upward slant at the end, just like he always signed her birthday cards. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Not yet. She'd barely slept since the reading of the will. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from unknown numbers, vague legal threats, friendly check-ins from cousins who hadn't spoken to her since high school. Her parents had sent a series of carefully crafted emails laced with guilt and veiled ultimatums, all of which Charlotte had marked as unread. Her sister Meredith had texted, "Let's be civil about this," which Charlotte found ironic given the lawsuit Meredith filed the next morning. Even Blake had called once, just once, to say, "You're not ready for this. Just let us handle the business. We'll set up a trust for you." She had hung up mid-sentence. On the 7th day, she woke before dawn, brewed a cup of Earl Grey, and sat by the window as the early light bathed her studio kitchen in gold. She opened the letter. "My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, then Philip has done as I asked and you're probably feeling overwhelmed, possibly even betrayed. I need you to know something. This was never about punishing them. It was about protecting something too fragile and too important to leave in the wrong hands. You are my legacy, Charlotte. Not the buildings. Not the numbers. The kindness you give freely. The integrity you wear like second skin. I've watched you quietly shape lives, students, strangers, even me. And I wanted to make sure you had the tools to carry that forward, even if it meant doing it in disguise. Do you remember the art residency in Provence when you were 20? You thought it was a scholarship you won. It wasn't. I arranged it through an old friend who owed me a favor. The economic theory seminar in DC? I asked Professor Huxley to let you attend under a pseudonym. The gallery internship? Arranged through Parker Holdings. The business planning courses on those art leadership retreats? Real MBA material. You completed the core of a business school curriculum, Charlotte, and you didn't even notice because I made it feel like art. You've always learned by doing. Now it's time to lead by doing. Bravo's Grand Petit. She read it 3 times. The first time, she sobbed. The second, she laughed through her tears. And the third time, she sat still, truly still, for the first time in a week. He hadn't left her unarmed. He'd believed in her enough to prepare her without telling her she was being prepared. Every odd opportunity, every invitation she almost turned down, every surprise acceptance letter, they weren't coincidences. They were stepping stones in a path he saw long before she did. And now it was her path to walk. The studio becomes a war room. Charlotte turned her apartment into her command center. She spread stacks of legal documents, journals, ledgers, and books across the dining table. Every evening after teaching at Eastview High, she would shed her paint-splattered clothes and change into business attire, black slacks, crisp blouse, hair tied back, and enter a different world. Preston, her grandfather's attorney, visited twice a week. This room reminds me of Teddy's first office, he said once, eyeing the chaotic mixture of easels and tax forms. Only, I think he had fewer brushes. Preston wasn't just a legal guide, he became her mentor. Through him, she began to understand the architecture of the empire she had inherited. The interlocking companies, the holding structures, the nonprofit arms, the liabilities and silent partnerships. She had once thought balance sheets were things other people understood. But she saw it now. Numbers were just a different kind of canvas. Each morning, before school, she read for an hour. Case studies, quarterly reports, business ethics. Each evening, she called the senior staff of Winters Holdings, one by one. Some answered coldly. Some hung up. A few, surprisingly, stayed on the line. One of them was Henry Grayson. He'd been head of acquisitions for 15 years, a bulldog in a 3-piece suit. You have no experience, he'd said bluntly in their first call. No, Charlotte replied. But I have vision. And the full legal authority. Are you willing to talk? He hesitated. 10 minutes. That's it. They spoke for 45. By week 3, she'd met with the board. By week 5, she'd hired an advisory team made of people her grandfather trusted, artists, economists, and one former CEO who had left the corporate world to run a food bank. By week 6, she announced her first executive decision. Winters Holdings would restructure its profit model to reinvest 15% of annual profits into community-based development, arts education, housing restoration, and small business grants for underserved neighborhoods. The backlash from the family was immediate. You're tanking the brand. Meredith screamed on a Zoom call. Do you want to turn it into a charity? No, Charlotte answered calmly. I want to turn it into a legacy worth remembering. A shift in the mirror. It happened on a Thursday. Charlotte had returned home late from a board review session. Exhausted, she kicked off her shoes, poured a glass of water, and turned on the light above her easel. There, unfinished, was a portrait she'd started months ago. A student of hers from Eastview, a shy boy named Miles with a stutter and a remarkable eye for geometry and nature. She hadn't touched the canvas since the funeral. She sat down and picked up a brush. For an hour, she painted in silence. Not for a gallery. Not for a grant. Just because she needed to remember who she was. And somewhere between the lines of color, she felt it, that quiet shift inside her. Not just from artist to leader, but from invisible to anchored. She was no longer the disappointment. No longer the one who didn't fit. She had carved out a space so uniquely hers that not even generational scorn could erase it. And more importantly, she had begun to shift how others saw her too. Preston had said it best over coffee one afternoon. "You were never the outsider, Charlotte," he told her. "They just built the wrong walls." Recognition in the unlikeliest of places. It was Blake who reached out first. A short message. "If you ever need help reading those construction zoning files, I'm around." Then came an email from one of her former students, now in college. "Miss Evans, I saw your interview in the Post. You're running a billion-dollar company and still painting? That gives me hope." Then came the letters, from small business owners in Charleston, from art teachers across the country, from people who had never met her but felt something move when they heard her story. The tide was turning. Not because Charlotte demanded it, but because she embodied it. She wasn't just leading the company. She was redefining what it meant to lead. And in the quiet, late one evening, Charlotte visited her grandfather's grave. She brought no flowers, no entourage. Just herself and the breeze rolling in from the coast. She sat in the grass, tracing the words carved into stone. Theodore Winters. Visionary. Builder. Grandfather. Create something worth staying for. "I'm trying," she whispered, "and I think I'm finally starting to understand what you saw." She pulled a small notebook from her coat. Inside it were notes for a new community initiative, a blend of art residency and entrepreneurship mentorship. A dream she might have been too timid to imagine 6 months ago. She placed the notebook gently on the headstone. "For you," she said, "and for me." The long mahogany dining table hadn't changed in decades. It still bore the faint scratches from family feasts, the waxy polish of tradition, and the echoes of arguments whispered beneath silver candlesticks. But for the first time in the history of the Evans Winters legacy, someone new sat at the head of the table. Charlotte. She had chosen not to wear black. Instead, she wore a tailored steel gray blazer over a soft lavender blouse, a subtle defiance of mourning, of submission, of being the quiet one in the room. Her hair was pinned back tightly, her fingers free of paint for once, though a faint trace of turquoise still clung to the cuticle of her left thumb. "Let them see who I am," she thought. Let them see what he saw. The rest of the family arrived in waves. First, her parents, Caroline in her signature pearls and icy smile, Robert behind her with a jaw so tense it looked wired shut. Then Meredith, armed with a tablet and a fresh blowout. Blake came last, his wife trailing behind him in a dress that screamed damage control. Cousins she barely recognized filtered in slowly, each carrying the look of someone expecting fireworks but hoping not to be too close when they explode. They all took their places. Charlotte waited until every chair was filled. Then she stood. "I know you didn't come here today to listen to me," she said, her voice steady. "But you will." The room shifted. No one interrupted, not yet. Perhaps they were too stunned to see her stand in that position. Perhaps they wanted to see what the art teacher would do with her sudden throne. She leaned slightly forward, hands braced on the table. "Let's not pretend we're here as a family. We're here because we all know the rules have changed." No one blinked. "My grandfather left me everything. Legally. Fully. But this meeting isn't about the will. It's about what comes next." She picked up a leather-bound folder from the seat beside her and opened it. Inside were photocopies of documents, screenshots, letters in her grandfather's own handwriting. She laid the first down, sliding it across the table toward her father. Embezzlement. Westbrook Development Account. Wire transfers traced to a personal casino account in Nevada. Dated 2018. Robert's face flushed a deep, angry red. Before he could speak, she moved to the next. Meredith. Internal emails forwarding proprietary information to outside parties during the 2020 merger negotiations. Violates 3 NDA clauses. Meredith's fingers tightened on her tablet. Blake, Charlotte continued, undisclosed offshore accounts, multiple tax filings altered by an intermediary flagged by federal auditors. Charlotte kept going, page by page. Each truth peeled the polish from the room like old wallpaper. "No, I didn't go digging," she said. "Grandpa did. Over 15 years. He left these to me not to use them against you, but to remind me why he chose not to trust any of you with his legacy." Caroline finally found her voice. "And what exactly is that legacy, Charlotte? Bankrupting the company for moral high ground? Dismantling everything your grandfather built just to spite us?" Charlotte didn't blink. "I'm not here for vengeance," she said. "I'm here for vision." She paused. "You think Grandpa was a businessman? He wasn't. He was a builder. Of homes. Of systems. Of opportunities. And somewhere along the line, this family decided that wealth was more important than worth." She stood taller now. "My vision for Parker Industries is not one of destruction. It's reconstruction. We're implementing a new model, one that includes community reinvestment, ethical development, and creative innovation. We will move forward as a business with a conscience." Silence. Then Blake scoffed. "So, what? You're going to start donating profits to starving artists and tree huggers?" Charlotte met his eyes. "Yes. Along with building affordable housing, launching educational initiatives, and funding social enterprises that align with our core values." Her mother let out a bitter laugh. "You'll ruin us within a year." Charlotte walked around the table slowly, letting her words fill the space deliberately. "You think this is weakness? But what I'm offering is strength. The kind that outlives market trends. The kind that earns trust, not just from investors, but from people." She circled back to the head of the table. "And make no mistake, this is happening with or without your approval. As of today, all Parker Industries operations report directly to me. If you'd like to stay involved, there will be a review process. If you want to challenge my authority, the will is airtight. Contest it, and you lose everything." No one moved. No one dared. She placed a small card on the table. It bore the Parker Industries crest and one sentence beneath: "Integrity is our greatest asset." Charlotte sat. "I called this meeting to offer a choice," she said softly, now that the fire had landed. "You can choose to walk away. Or you can help me build something that will last longer than our last names." The room was still. Her father looked down at his hands. Her mother looked away. Blake leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. And then, unexpectedly, it was Meredith who spoke. "I want in." Everyone turned. "I did a lot of things I'm not proud of," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I thought success was a zero-sum game. That's what we were taught. But maybe it's not too late to build something better." Charlotte nodded slowly. "It isn't." Tyler, who had remained unusually quiet the whole meeting, chimed in from the corner. "You're gonna need help with logistics, zoning, staffing. This new model, it's big. Bigger than anything we've done." Charlotte's eyes met his. "You offering?" He nodded once. "If you'll have me." A quiet alliance began to form. One by one, hands came off arms. Eyes softened. And though not everyone agreed, not everyone opposed. It wasn't triumph. It was the start of something truer. That night, alone in the estate. Later that night, after everyone had left, Charlotte wandered the halls of the Parker estate. Her estate now. She passed the dining room, dimly lit and quiet again. It no longer intimidated her. She ended up in the study where her grandfather's journal still sat on the shelf. She opened to the last page. "Legacy isn't what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in the hearts of those brave enough to follow your path. I only needed one. Make them see it, Charlotte. Then teach them to live it." She closed the journal and looked around. She was no longer the girl sitting at the edge of the room. She was the one at the head of the table. And from here, everything was possible. It started with a signature. One stroke of the pen on a thick stack of HR reform documents, and Charlotte Evans rewrote not just company policy, but the very soul of Parker Industries. In the months that followed the explosive family meeting, Charlotte got to work. Quietly, consistently, strategically. She didn't storm through the company with declarations or vanity projects. Instead, she walked the factory floors in flat shoes, sat in break rooms with warehouse staff, listened to interns who had never been in the same room as a board member. She asked questions like, "What do you need that no one's ever asked about? What would make you feel like this company is worth staying for?" The answers changed her, and, eventually, everything else. The transformation begins. The first major change came in the form of a living wage policy. No more minimums. No more just enough to get by. Every employee, janitor to junior analyst, was paid a salary that met the actual cost of living in their respective cities. It shocked shareholders. It electrified the staff. Some investors threatened to pull out. But others, especially those who believed in conscious capitalism, leaned in. Then came the Emergency Assistance Fund, a reserve account for employees dealing with medical crises, housing instability, or family emergencies. Charlotte refused to make it bureaucratic. A small team of social workers and former employees who'd experienced hardship themselves were appointed to manage it with empathy, not paperwork. When news of the program spread, it went viral on social media. "A CO with a soul," one headline read. Charlotte didn't bother responding. She was already in another meeting, discussing paid parental leave. By Q2, Parker Industries had also implemented 6-month paid maternity and paternity leave, childcare stipends, mental health services integrated into workplace wellness programs, quarterly community service sabbaticals for employees to volunteer with non-profits of their choice. But the boldest initiative was the one closest to Charlotte's heart. The Teddy Winters Art Foundation. Named in honor of her grandfather, the foundation funded scholarships for underprivileged youth to attend art schools, summer camps, and mentorship programs. It partnered with public schools to restore dying art departments, installed art supply banks in rural communities, and funded local mural projects across Charleston's underserved neighborhoods. The first class of scholarship recipients included a boy from the Eastview High School Art Club where Charlotte once taught. His name was Javier, and his parents both worked double shifts at a laundromat. When he was asked on a local interview what the scholarship meant to him, he simply said, "It means I finally matter." Charlotte watched that clip in her office with tears in her eyes. The sibling shift. Tyler came to her office unannounced one morning. She was knee-deep in architectural renderings for a new community hub being built on a previously abandoned Parker-owned property. He knocked on the doorframe and leaned in. "You got a minute?" She looked up, surprised. "Always." He closed the door gently behind him, his demeanor unusually soft. No arrogance. No sarcasm. Just thoughtfulness. "I've been looking at your sustainability proposals," he began. "The stuff for the community greenhouse projects, the solar infrastructure, the water conservation integration. It's impressive." She tilted her head, cautiously hopeful. "Thank you." He hesitated. "I want in." Charlotte blinked. "I know what you think of me," Tyler continued. "And you're not wrong about how I used to be. But this new model, it excites me. Not because it's flashy or marketable, but because it's right. And because I think, maybe for the first time in a long time, I believe in what we're doing." Charlotte nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this together." And they did. Tyler took over the Sustainable Development Division, reimagining Parker's entire approach to land use, energy sourcing, and materials. He proposed retrofitting old commercial spaces into eco-forward housing for transitional communities. He even led negotiations with green architects and secured government partnerships that brought in millions in matching grants. More importantly, he listened. To the janitors. To the interns. To her. The surprise of Vanessa. Vanessa was harder. She had been a rival for so long. Charming, cutthroat, polished to perfection. For years, she treated Charlotte like a blemish on the family brand. But something about the new Parker Industries structure had shaken her. It wasn't the loss of power that cut deepest. It was the revelation that, in all her ambition, she had never once inspired the kind of loyalty Charlotte now received from total strangers. The turning point came at a board gala. Vanessa approached her on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself as if bracing against the warm summer air. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the skyline. "About everything." Charlotte said nothing, letting her speak. I thought if I outperformed everyone, I'd matter more. I didn't understand that some people don't have to perform to be worthy. She turned to Charlotte, eyes glistening. I've spent years trying to win a game I didn't even realize I was losing. Charlotte offered her a soft, measured smile. Then maybe it's time to stop playing and start building something new. From that night forward, Vanessa began attending therapy. She stepped down from the competitive board seat she had fought so viciously to keep and asked instead to shadow Charlotte's community impact department. She started at the bottom, making coffee, organizing donation drives, planning art gallery tours for inner-city students. It was awkward at first, humbling, but over time, the walls fell. They started having lunch together, laughing, even painting together on weekends, just like when they were girls, before power and pressure had clouded everything. The studio returns. Charlotte converted one of the downtown warehouses into a hybrid innovation studio and art space, a symbol of the bridge she now walked between two worlds, business and beauty, efficiency and empathy, data and dreams. The space pulsed with energy, part gallery, part co-working lab. On any given day, you could find financial analysts brainstorming alongside graffiti artists. A mural of her grandfather covered the west wall, painted by Charlotte herself. Not the businessman everyone remembered, but the man she knew, soft-eyed, paint-smudged, smiling gently. In the center of the studio stood one piece that drew every visitor's attention. It was a collaborative painting, one Grandpa Teddy had started years ago but never finished. Charlotte had found it in a storage unit weeks after taking office, unfinished brush strokes frozen in time. She had completed it. Her strokes met his, different, but harmonious. A seamless dialogue across decades. Beneath the painting was a plaque that read, "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you teach others to carry forward." The new Charlotte. Charlotte wasn't the same woman who had walked into the estate for that reading. That Charlotte had been uncertain, shaky, battling the wounds of years of invisibility. This Charlotte? She stood tall in every room. Not because she had become someone new, but because she had finally been allowed to be herself, fully and unapologetically. Her leadership style was unlike anything the industry had seen. She didn't bark orders or flex ego. She listened. She noticed. She created environments where people flourished. And it worked. Productivity rose. Retention increased. Applications flooded in from Ivy Leagues and grassroots collectives alike. Investors began to speak of Parker Industries not just as a business, but as a movement, a quiet moment. One late evening, as the last staffers filed out of the studio, Charlotte stayed behind. She stood alone in the center of the art room, bathed in soft light, surrounded by canvases, contracts, and conversations still echoing from the day. She looked at the mural of Grandpa Teddy, placed her hand on her chest, and whispered, "We did it. Not I." Because though he was gone, his faith in her had never left. And now, because of that faith, thousands of others had found a new way to believe. The storage room wasn't listed on any blueprint. Charlotte discovered it by accident, while supervising renovations at the old Parker estate wing slated to become a cultural arts annex. One of the contractors had complained about a wall that sounded hollow near the library. Curious, Charlotte returned after hours, flashlight in hand, and knocked gently on the plaster. 3 soft thuds. 1 deeper echo. She pressed her palm to the wall, and just like that, a whisper of air moved through the cracks. The false panel gave way to a narrow staircase. Stone. Silence. She descended slowly, heart pounding, not from fear, but anticipation. At the bottom was a door with a rusted handle and no lock. She pushed. What she found took her breath away. It wasn't just a room. It was a sanctuary. Canvases leaned against every wall, rows upon rows of oil paintings, sketches, watercolors, all carefully preserved beneath sheets and tarps. The light bulb above flickered weakly, casting golden shadows over the artistry hidden for decades. In the center of the room stood an easel. And on that easel, a painting half-finished, 2 chairs beneath an oak tree, one empty, one filled with the blurred outline of a woman, unfinished, but unmistakably her. Charlotte gasped. At the foot of the easel was a sealed envelope with her name. She sank to her knees as she opened it. My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, then you've found the part of me I was too afraid to share in life. I've spent a lifetime building empires from concrete and steel. But before I was a developer, I was a dreamer. I painted in secret because I couldn't bear for the world to tell me I wasn't good enough. So I gave myself a new name, a hidden brush, and a place only I could go to remain whole. Art and business are not opposites, Charlotte. Both require courage to create something from nothing. They both demand risk, heart, and sacrifice. You've already proven you understand both. This gallery was never meant to stay hidden. I was waiting for someone who would understand not just what I created, but why I created it. I believe you are that person. Finish what I couldn't. Complete the painting. Share this with the world. Let them see that a legacy is more than stock or steel. It's what survives when the dust settles. With all my love, Grandpa T. Tears spilled freely down Charlotte's cheeks. Not because he had hidden it, but because he had trusted her to find it, to finish it. A vision shared. The exhibition was her idea. But it wasn't just an event, it was a declaration. Set inside the newly restored Charleston Art Museum, the gallery opened beneath soaring glass ceilings, every wall a tribute to legacy, vulnerability, and courage. At the entrance, guests were greeted with a title carved in wrought iron above the main hall. The brush and the blueprint, a legacy in layers. One wing displayed Charlotte's own work, abstract landscapes filled with color and movement, pieces from her teaching days beside modern collaborations with young artists from the Teddy Winters Foundation. But the heart of the gallery was the vault room. There, for the first time ever, hung the secret works of T.W. Holden, her grandfather's artistic pseudonym. Each painting told a silent story. A young boy sketching shadows beneath a stairwell. A woman with fire in her eyes cradling a newborn. A city skyline, blurred not by rain, but by memory. Beneath each painting was a small brass plate etched with the words, "Artist unknown until now." And in the final room, in soft spotlight, was the unfinished piece they had completed together, her brush layered over his vision. 2 chairs beneath the grand oak, now fully painted. One still empty. One now filled, with a woman smiling toward the viewer, paintbrush in hand. Charlotte. The night of the opening. The night was warm with spring, the air buzzing with the soft hum of live cello and voices thick with awe. Critics came expecting nostalgia. They left speechless. Investors came curious. They left inspired. Children wandered in with wide eyes, pointing at colors. Elderly couples held hands beneath the vaulted ceilings. And somewhere in the crowd, a high school art teacher wept quietly before a canvas. Charlotte moved through the space like someone fully at peace. Tyler stood near the drinks table, eyes misting. "I still don't believe he painted all this," he whispered. "He was always so hard." "He was many things," Charlotte replied, "but never empty." Vanessa approached her later that evening, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than honor him," she said. "You've freed him." Charlotte smiled softly. "Maybe I've freed myself too." One last letter. 3 days after the exhibit, Charlotte returned to the secret room one last time. She had no plans to seal it again. She wanted the next generation of Parker heirs, if there ever were any, to know the full truth of it. But tucked behind a stack of rolled canvas, she found one last envelope. Smaller than the first. Different handwriting. It was addressed not to her, but to us. To the one who dares to blend color with commerce. Know this, your work will not always be understood. Your choices will be questioned. But art, like leadership, is not about consensus. It is about truth. It is about saying, "I was here, and I mattered." Don't be afraid to sign your name to both your paintings and your decisions. This family was built on more than fortune. It was built on vision. Yours now. Be bold, be kind, and above all, create. TWH. Charlotte folded the letter slowly and placed it inside the wooden frame of the last painting. Then she walked out into the sun. Legacy reimagined. Years later, Students studying at the Teddy Winters Arts Campus, a multidisciplinary creative center funded by Parker Industries, would learn about the two-chair painting as a pivotal moment in modern Southern art. They wouldn't just study it as art. They'd study it as a decision. The moment a woman chose to honor the quiet bravery of the man who came before her, and in doing so, showed the world that legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you build, finish, and share. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Charlotte returned to the old oak on the Winters property, the same one from the painting she and her grandfather had completed together. The grass was still damp from early dew, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves like melted gold. She wore jeans and an old denim jacket splattered with forgotten paint, her hair loosely tied, the way she used to wear it when she taught at Eastview High. She sat down on the weathered bench beneath the tree, alone except for the breeze. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself feel everything. The weight she had carried, the lives she had touched, the silence she had once lived in, and now, the resonance she had found in her own voice. Memory in brushstrokes. She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out an old sketchbook. The cover was cracked, the pages curling at the corners, but each drawing was a moment frozen in graphite, the faces of students who once struggled with color theory, the way her grandfather looked when he wasn't being the tycoon, the fragile joy of a child seeing their art framed for the first time. One sketch stood out, a self-portrait from years ago. In it, she had drawn herself small, standing behind a classroom window while the world passed by outside. Back then, she had believed that stepping out of that room meant losing who she was. But she'd learned the truth the hard way. Glowing star, sometimes the person the world overlooks, is the one who carries the deepest strength. Charlotte had once been the disappointment in the family, the one who didn't chase mergers or boardroom battles. She had chosen classrooms and canvases, not corner offices. And for that, they had dismissed her. But the very qualities that made her invisible in that world, her quiet, her empathy, her steady hand, became the foundation of something far more enduring. Charlotte never screamed for attention. She never needed the loudest voice in the room. She listened. She noticed. And in doing so, she created a company, a movement, a legacy that listened back. Glowing Star true leadership doesn't roar. It invites. And once invited, people don't just follow it. They believe in it. Charlotte's team didn't rally around her because she held the most power. They rallied because she created a place where people felt seen. She remembered Javier, the scholarship recipient who once felt invisible, now studying fine arts in New York. She remembered Tyler, her brother, whose ego once outshone his heart, now managing sustainability programs with compassion and precision. She remembered the first time Vanessa apologized, really apologized, not as a tactic, but as a first step to healing. These people had changed not because Charlotte told them to, but because she showed them what was possible. From canvas to community, the Teddy Winters Art Foundation had expanded into 12 cities. Charlotte made it a point to visit everyone. In each new location, she held hands with teachers, hugged students, stood in paint-covered gymnasiums turned galleries, and told them, "You don't need permission to be brilliant." She meant it, because she had spent too long waiting for someone to tell her she could matter, until the only voice left was her own. And that voice had become enough. A lesson in letters. A few weeks after the museum exhibition, Charlotte received a letter, handwritten in looping script from a young girl in Mississippi named Liana. "Dear Miss Charlotte, my mom works 2 jobs and we live in a trailer. I didn't think I'd ever get to go to art school. Then someone from your program called and said I got in. They said your foundation saw my drawings. I don't know who showed them. But thank you. I want to be like you when I grow up. Not rich. Liana, age 11. Charlotte read it 3 times before placing it in a wooden frame. She didn't need Forbes rankings or gala awards. That letter was the proof. A legacy etched in silence. She stood up from the oak bench and walked to the tree, placing her hand on the trunk. Here, where her grandfather once sat beside her, was where the real inheritance had always lived, not in the vaults or companies or headlines, but in courage. Glowing Star art and business are not opposites, Charlotte, he had written. Both require courage to create something from nothing. And she had done just that. Not just with brush and policy, but with herself. She had become something no inheritance could bestow. A woman who led not by lineage, but by love. The final gallery. Months later, on the first anniversary of her grandfather's passing, Charlotte opened a new permanent exhibit in Charleston called The Quiet Revolution. It wasn't about profits. It wasn't even about art. It was about people who had changed the world, not by shouting, but by showing up with integrity and vision. There were no velvet ropes. Visitors walked freely through the space, touching stories, leaving behind their own. At the center stood two easels. One held the final collaborative painting between Charlotte and her grandfather. The other was blank, inviting visitors to contribute a single brushstroke. A living piece. A growing legacy. The lesson that lingered. As Charlotte sat alone on the gallery steps that evening, watching families filter out into the Charleston night, she smiled, not the smile of someone who had conquered, but of someone who had connected. The greatest myth, she realized, was that you had to become someone else to matter. The truth? Glowing star, you never needed to become anything other than who you already were. And sometimes, the world doesn't need a hero. It just needs someone brave enough to be themselves. In today's hyper-competitive, high-volume world, Charlotte's story reminds us that character, empathy, and authenticity are far more valuable than titles or transactions. You don't need a spotlight to make a difference. You need conviction. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, a quiet student, or someone rebuilding from scratch, leadership begins the moment you choose courage over conformity. It begins when you believe your voice matters, even when it shakes. Your unique path, however untraditional, might just be the one the world has been waiting for. So don't shrink to fit the mold. Shatter it, and build something only you could build.